The mountain that wasn't a mountain rose like a broken tooth from the dust plains of Threxus 9. From orbit it looked like a collapsed caldera. Up close, it was a quarry of ancient forces' sheer escarpments stacked in crooked plates, as if the planet had tried to fold itself shut and failed halfway. The miners called it the suture. The geology team called it a problem that didn't match the surveyor's models. Elias Kale stood at the edge of the largest sinkhole with his helmet off, and his eyes narrowed to slits against the grit. The air here smelled of iron and the cold sweetness that followed a desert storm. Wind hissed over the hole and carried back a sound like distant singing. Nobody else seemed to hear it. "You're sure you want to do this alone?" Yara asked, slinging a coil of smartrip off her shoulder. She was head of safety for the outpost, a job that often meant telling people not to die in especially stupid ways. Her tattoos, little topographic lines around her wrists, were hidden under dust and sweat. "Alone means less weight on the lines," Elias said, keeping his voice light. "Less chance of a sympathetic collapse, and more chance no one sees you make a bad decision. Define bad. Anything that ends with me offering condolences to an empty cabin." He smiled, then tried to temper it into something reassuring. "I'll be careful." She stared at him a beat, as if measuring the volume of his recklessness, then pressed a spray patch into his palm. "For cuts, or the holes you're going to tear in that suit. Comms check every 5 minutes, or I start pulling you up by the ankles. Deal?" On the ridge behind them, 3 miners watched with the particular scorn of people who had learned to survive by distrusting curiosity. They'd been the ones who reported the anomalies, drills jamming for no reason, the vein of ore that flowed like fluid around sensors, the ringing in their teeth when they stood near the suture too long. "You going into the old mouth?" one of them called, a bony man with a face the sun had sculpted. "Nothing good in there," Yara rounded on them. "You got a union complaint, file it. Otherwise take your superstition," and Elias raised a hand. "It's fine." He turned to the miners. "What's the old mouth?" The bony one spat, then seemed to reconsider and swallowed. "Rock that talks, water that looks at you. Tools don't work right. You bring nothing from it. You put nothing in it." He tapped his temple. "It keeps things. Stories keep things," Elias said gently. "Rocks keep time." He nodded to Yara. "I'm going." The descent began with the ritual of gear, checking the magnetic anchors against the fractured granite, linking carabiners to smartrup that could predict load changes, sealing the cuffs of his suit and feeling the microclimate spool up around his skin. He took one last breath of open air before clicking the helmet in place. The visor went from transparent to a faint soft HUD overlay, heart rate, ambient gas mix, suit temperature, compass jittering uselessly inside a maze of iron ore. He stepped over the lip and let the line take his weight. The world tilted, the sky swung up and away, and the suture became a throat. For the first 20 meters there was light, that pale, honest light of noon and thin air. Beyond that, shadow swallowed the edges of things. He clicked a shoulder lamp on. A clean cone of white cut down the shaft and made it feel less like falling into an animal's gullet. Striations appeared in the rock bands of metallic sheen alternating with dull sediment. Like a barcode too long for the eyes to parse. "Comms check," Yara's voice came, slightly flattened by encryption. "You still pretty down there?" "Pretty as ever," Elias said. "Rope tension nominal. Anchor's good. Copy. 5 minutes." He descended past a ledge thick with accreted salts that glittered like frost. When his glove brushed the crystals, the suit picked up a faint charge, as if the salt remembered storms. He'd crawled through caves as a graduate student on earth limestone pipes, and sinkholes in the new Anatolian range, basalt pillows under the Atlantic shelf, but Threxus 9 had none of those comfortable comparisons. The planet had been hammered by impacts, torn by tidal forces, frozen and thawed dozens of times. Its crust a palimpsest of disasters. A geologist could spend 10 lifetimes cataloging its scars. At 40 meters he reached the first choke point, a narrowing where fractured slabs had fallen across the shaft and wedged themselves into an unstable arch. He braced boots and shoulder, exhaled to thin his chest, and slid through. Dust plumed. A shard scraped his forearm, and the suit flashed a warning in the corner of his visor. He glanced, superficial. He kept moving, past the choke, The shaft widened into a chamber as unexpected as an air bubble in glass. His light played over formations that had no right to exist in this mix of rock filigrees of metallic filaments draped like veils, fossilized ripples in petrified wave patterns, and, in the center, a column of stone riddled with hexagonal cells like a honeycomb. He drifted toward it, breath loud in his helmet, and reached with one gloved finger to tap a cell wall dot. It chimed. He froze. Tapped again. A different note. Report, Yara said, right on time. Acoustic resonators in a central column. He said, possibly metallic inclusions forming hexagonal. He stopped, letting the language of geology, which had trained him to disassemble wonder into taxonomy, fall away. It sings when you touch it. Do not play the cave like a damn xylophone, Yara said. Take your samples and move. I didn't bring a chisel, Elias said, which was true. He'd made that choice at breakfast, with a bowl of protein oats and 2 cups of coffee, and the memory of Miner's eyes on him. Something about the suture felt unkind to splitting. Then take pictures. He did, sweeping his lamp in slow arcs to map the chamber with light and shadow. Then continued downward, past the honeycomb's soft notes, into a chute that sloped instead of dropped. The floor here was dust over stone, thick and fine, the kind that remembers every footfall. His own prints trailed behind him like a second shadow. He leaned on the wall once to adjust the angle of the line and felt the stone tremble, not with his weight but with something distant and periodic, like a heartbeat in a giant mammal asleep under miles of rock. The chute kinked right, then widened again. The air grew cooler against his cheeks. His breath condensed inside the helmet for a moment before the suit whisked the moisture away. The singing came back, softer, not from a single structure this time, but woven into the cave's geometry the way certain cathedrals turn whispers into sermons. He tested comms. They were still clear. He told himself that was because he'd routed the antenna through the rope's braided copper, not because the cave let him speak to his own kind. His timer chimed. Still with me, Yara said. Still, Elias said. He considered adding, and the cave is too, but decided he didn't want to be benched for poetry. How's your O2? 82%. Turn around at 68. That's conservative. That's my job. He went on. The chute emptied into a vertical break of fault that wasn't quite vertical, more like a stack of stairs carved by a drunk giant. He down-climbed slowly, paring weight from his steps. The walls here were darker, almost slick-looking, full of microfractures that caught the light like veins of glass. He reached out once and tapped a fracture. It felt pliant, not in movement, but in the way a memory is pliant when you tell it to yourself differently. He snatched his hand back and told his mind to stop making metaphors where physics would do. There was a sound, not the singing, not the wind, not his own breath amplified in the helmet. A wet sound, patient as melting ice. The rock inhaled cold around him. He rounded a last jut of stone and found the chamber. Sometimes a place is so thoroughly itself that description feels like an apology. The chamber was not large. It was intimate, like the inside of a cupped hand. Its ceiling arched in a curve that must have been math once. The floor rose gently to a basin in the center. In the basin lay water, or a thing that had chosen to resemble water. It did not reflect, or rather, it reflected everything except the man looking at it. Elias stepped closer and saw the walls throw themselves down into the liquid, every crack and stain, and salt bloom while his own lamplit figure did not appear. It wasn't darkness. There was luminosity in the stuff, a deep gradation of blue through black, a slow inner weather. The suit's sampling module chimed to life as if anticipating him. A sensor wand slid from his forearm in a neat little curl of engineering. Comms check, Yara said, clipped. I'm getting interference, visual on a pool, Elias said, unable to keep the hunger out of his voice. Unmapped cavity, estimated diameter 3 meters. Liquid is unusual, a small beat. Define unusual without saying beautiful or calling my name. It doesn't have a specular return for my reflection. Elias, I know. He swallowed. Running non-contact scan. He extended the wand. It pulsed a series of harmless spectroscopies across the surface. The data that returned made his HUD stutter, not in failure but in indecision. Density estimates fluctuated between water and something that had never been written down. Surface tension readouts looked like a seismograph mid-tembler. Calm, calm. A spike that meant nothing in known units. Then calm again. The M backscatter showed a shallow trough across multiple bands, as if the liquid absorbed certain frequencies not as energy, but as flavors. Data's nonsense, he said. Or we never built the right instruments. Copy, Yara said. Copy also that your heart rate is climbing and your oxygen is at 70, noted. He crouched at the edge. The stone here was smooth, polished by time or by something that knew how to polish the idea of stone. He reached a gloved finger toward the surface and stopped, the way you stop before the last step in a staircase. Because the memory of falling is older than your sense of balance. The miners had said, you bring nothing from it. You put nothing in it. He switched the wand to sample mode. It would take a microscopic trace, wick it into a cartridge like a scent into a cloth. The moment the tip broke the surface, the pool shivered. Not a ripple, a shiver, a full-body recognition that traveled through the liquid faster than it should have. The lights on his wrist flickered. A note rose in the Era clean. Singletone then fell away as if embarrassed. Interference just spiked, Yara said. What did you do? Touched it. With a sampler. I told you no souvenirs. I didn't take anything, he said, though the cartridge showed it had captured a precisely regulated amount. Just asked for a hello. He stared into the pool. Up close, the knocked reflection of his lamp's glare resolved into tessellated shapes like scales under a fish's skin. They micro-shifted in ways that made the hairs on his arms lift under the suit. His mouth was dry. His tongue felt like it belonged to someone else. He knew better than to remove his helmet. He knew better than to break protocol in any number of ways. He had been in caves where one stupid minute meant a rescue that lasted days or a funeral that lasted an afternoon. He had taught those lectures himself, pointing to slides of smiling researchers who had found a way to die in environments that did not forgive. And yet, he could have explained it later, perhaps as a compulsion, something the pool exuded, a pheromone for minds. He could have called it hubris, or the slow erosion of caution in a man who had come too far to be ordinary. But in the instant, the thought was simple and terrible. If you do not, you will never know. And knowing had been a mountain he climbed even when there were no incidents to report, no grants to win, no faces to impress. It had been the thing that made home into a tent he rolled into a pack and carried to the edges of maps. He sat back on his heels, released the helmet seals with a two-turn twist, felt the internal pressure slip, and peeled the shell away. Air kissed his face. It was colder than he expected, and it tasted clean. No methane spike, no sulfurage, nothing to warn an animal. The pool's scent, if it had one, was metallic and something like rain on hot stone. Elias, Yar's voice was a rope thrown down a well. I just got a suit integrity ping. Do not tell me, I'm fine, he said, and in that half-second avoided deciding whether or not to apologize. The air's good. It's not tested, Yara said, a low growl. If you're not replacing that helmet in the next 5 seconds, I'm triggering the winch. He could have put it back. He could have said, you're right, and meant it, and gone up with a sample and a report. He could have left the pool to the second expedition and the third and the paper. No one would believe. He leaned over the basin. The liquid wore his lamp like a crown, but refused to show him his own face. The gap between his mouth and the surface was small enough now that he saw the microteslations swelling and shrinking like plankton breathing at night. He cupped his hands, old gesture, older than language, and dipped. Cold fire filled his palms. That was the only phrase that fit. Cold that was active, cold with an intent. His skin prickled. His throat closed for an instant in the reflex that stops a man from drowning. He made it open. He lifted his hands to his lips and drank. The taste was metallic at first. Yes, but more than iron. It was the metallic taste of bleeding a nose and remembering childhood. The metallic whisper of an old coin against your teeth. It spread. It did not cascade down his throat like water. It unfolded through him like a map unrolling across a table. It was not numbness. It was an inventory. It counted his cells and his scars and the bacterial colonies that called him home. It moved into his blood as if it had the right to be there. Elias heard himself make a sound that was not quite a gasp. He set his hands against the stone and felt the world shift by a hairbreadth. No, not the world. His position within an account he had not known was being kept. His lamp flickered once, twice, steadied. On his HUD, which still hovered faint on the visor propped against his knee, numbers went senseless for a moment and then snapped into patterns he did not recognize, but knew the shape of. The way you know that a melody will resolve even if you've never heard it. Elias, Yara's voice had dropped all pretense of professionalism. Answer me right now or I'm coming down with a team. He opened his mouth to say, I'm here. Another voice spoke first. It was close to his ear, and behind him and inside his ear canal and inside the bones beside his ear. It was a whisper with the authority of a pressure wave. It did not speak in any accent he knew. It spoke in a closeness that suggested it had never needed to raise its volume to be heard. You have no idea what you just became, it said. Elias froze, one hand sliding toward the helmet without his consent, the other braced on the stone. The cave's singing faded into a held breath, and even the small sounds, the tick of cooling metal, the slow drip he had mistaken for melting ice, paused, as if sound itself were waiting to see whether he would run. He did not run. He turned. His light raked the chamber wall, smooth stone, the curve like a rib, the shadow of his own movement. No one stood there. The whisper had the weight of someone so close their breath should have warmed his neck. His heart punched once hard enough to make a bright ring at the edges of his vision. He forced the helmet back on with hands that wanted to shake and sealed it. Air hissed around his cheeks. Yara was still talking orders, threats, the crisp syllables of someone building a ladder out of language. Say something, she demanded. He tried. He found that the ordinary words had become small. I'm okay. I'm coming up. I heard a voice, he said, and heard himself laugh. A single bark that somehow did not echo. It said, he stopped, not because he could not say it, but because saying it would invite it to be true, in the way signing a thing makes it legal. He glanced down. The pool, placid as a held breath, did not reflect him still, but something in it reflected his pulse, tiny tessellations waking and sleeping in sync. With the rhythm of blood in his wrists, he swallowed. I'm coming up, he told Yara. Don't cut the line. For once, she breathed. We agree. He heard her start to call a team anyway, a blessing disguised as a precaution. The rope shifted as the winch took weight. Elias took one last look at the basin, feeling a gravity that was not mass. The whisper said nothing else. It did not need to. It had already moved in. The surface of Threxus 9 greeted Elias with ordinary silence, which felt like a lie. The sky was a pale yellow smear, the twin suns low and hazed by dust. Wind carried grit across the flats, whispering over hulls of land crawlers and storage tanks. It should have been homecoming, but to Elias it all felt dimmed, like seeing a photograph of a place instead of standing in it. Yara unsealed his helmet the moment his boots touched the ground. She looked for blood, tremor, pallor. Vitals are green, she muttered, glancing at her wristpad. But you look like you've swallowed lightning. What the hell did you drink down there? He almost laughed, almost told her, but the words wouldn't fit in his mouth. Just air, he lied. His voice cracked on the second syllable. She studied him a long second, then jabbed a finger into his chest plate. Med bay now. The body forgets how to be ordinareth. Med scanner confirmed what Elias already knew. Something inside him had changed, and it wasn't subtle. His blood sample glowed faintly under the analyzer. The system flagged unidentified compound across for different indices. Heart rate, unsteady. Temperature, climbing. His cells, according to the imager, showed unusual fluorescence under multi-spectrum excitation, which was a polite way of saying they pulsed like bioluminescent plankton. The station medic, Dr. Harrell, stared at the readouts and muttered, "Machines busted." Then, after recalibrating 3 times, he looked Elias dead in the eye. "What did you do?" Elias thought of the pool, its tessellations breathing in sync with his veins. He thought of the whisper that still rang faintly in his skull, as if replaying itself in the bone marrow. "Exploration," he said, the word dry as dust. "Exploration doesn't rewrite your hematology." Harold backed away slightly, like Elias was an experiment about to go critical. "You need to be quarantined until I know what this is." Quarantined meant sealed in a 6x8 glass box with filtered air and suspicion for company. Elias didn't fight it. Part of him wanted something to hold in what had followed him out of the cave. Dreams that aren't dreams. First night in quarantine, Elias dreamed of light. Not a vision, not a fantasy. A lattice of structures vast as galaxies, spanning across starfields he didn't recognize. Lines of brilliance intersected like highways, nodes pulsed like cities. It was alive not metaphorically, but in the way a neural map is alive. He realized with terror and awe, this isn't a dream. I'm looking at something real. When he woke, his palms still tingled as if they'd held the lattice. His skin along the veins shimmered faintly in the dim quarantine light. The whisper returned, faint but persistent. You are sensing. Elias pressed his hands against his ears, as though he could shut the voice out like noise. It stayed. It wasn't coming from outside. Machinery and men don't trust him. The third day, machines refused to behave around him. A medbot entering his cell froze mid-step, servos locked, then restarted with its memory wiped. His wristpad flickered nonsense symbols whenever he touched it. Even the station's water recycler hiccuped during his scheduled shower, spilling lukewarm sludge instead of clean spray. Everything shorts around him. A technician whispered in the hallway outside his cell, like he's broadcasting static. Miners walked past the glass with muttered curses. One spat the word cave marked. Superstition spread faster than radiation alarms. Yara visited once. Arms folded, jaw set. She didn't ask what happened in the cavern. She only said, the company's sniffing. Word is, they'll ship you to the orbital labs. No one comes back from orbital labs. Do you believe I'm dangerous? Elias asked. Yara hesitated too long. I believe you changed. The voices of the planet in the seventh night. Elias heard the planet. It began with the wind gusts moaning against the station bulkheads. Except layered under the moan was a pattern. Syllables, broken but purposeful. He sat upright on his cot, heart hammering. Then the stone beneath the outpost vibrated. A low hum, almost seismic, but it carried cadence. Words, fractured, in no language human engineers had coded into the seismic sensors. He pressed his ear to the cold floor, and the vibrations resolved into meaning, not full sentences, but fragments, the continuum, the waking. Anchor found. Elias staggered back, clutching his skull, the whisper in his own head braided with the planet's murmur, until he could no longer tell them apart. The tester, Harold, growing more frantic by the day, insisted on stress tests. Your vitals are stable but wrong. We need to know what you are now. They strapped Elias to a diagnostic chair. Electrodes mapped his neural activity. They asked him to focus on a steel rod suspended in a mag field. He did. Without effort. The rod bent, metal creaking like a reed in wind. Every monitor shrieked red. Sparks popped across the console. A tech swore and yanked power. Elias sagged in the chair, more afraid of himself than of their fear. I didn't mean, you did not mean it, Dr. Harold whispered. His eyes glittered with a mix of scientific hunger and terror. You're not human anymore. The words stung more than Elias expected. Not human. He wanted to protest, to demand proof. But he remembered the pool, the taste of infinity, and the whisper that had claimed him. He was synchronizing, becoming something else. And part of him, deep, guilty, didn't want it to stop. The first reports came from a shuttle pilot named Goran, a man who'd flown in the Belt Wars and had nerves scarred by plasma fire. He was ferrying Or to the orbital depot when his comms dropped into dead static. No warning, no error messages, just silence. Then he saw them, black ships, 3 of them, smooth, horizon-shaped, like shards of night folded into geometry the eye slid away from. No markings, no beacons. They drifted above Threxus 9's sky like predators in deep water. The pilot transmitted nothing back because the comms stayed dead until he entered atmosphere again. When he landed, he staggered out of the cockpit, helmet still on, and rasped, "There's something up there." Within hours, the entire outpost buzzed with fear. Corporate Responseccommand relayed the report to the company liaison, a thin man named Arns who wore polished boots even in the dust. Probably pirates, he announced in the mess hall, his voice too loud, too certain. But the kind with stealth drives. Nothing to worry about if we keep to protocols. Stay on shift. Output continues, the miners muttered. Yara spat on the floor, and everyone's eyes, sooner or later, flicked toward the quarantine wing toward Elias. Rumors spread fast. The ships came for him. The ships were waiting because of what he carried in his blood. Some said he was a beacon. Others whispered he was a contagion. Elias heard the whispers, but he also felt something else. The ships themselves, distant above the sky, vibrating on the same impossible frequency as the pool. Their presence hummed in his marrow. He knew with a bone-deep certainty they weren't pirates. They were watching him. First contact in the 9th night after the ships appeared. Elias woke to alarms. Not the corporate klaxon. This was a subtler sound, a low drumming that rattled the glass of his quarantine cell. Lights strobed. His veins glowed in response, pale lines of luminescence tracing his arms, his neck. The whisper spoke again. They are here. He rose to his feet. The glass wall of his cell flickered, its polarization field stuttering like a dying candle. Shadows coalesced in the corners. Not men, not even forms, just distortions, as if space itself hesitated where they stood. Then, with a shift like water settling, 3 beings materialized inside the room. They were tall, draped in cloaks of light that bent around their frames. Their faces were obscured, as if reality itself refused to focus on them. The air shivered with the vibration of their presence. One stepped closer, and Elias's heart stopped fighting because the resonance matched the pool exactly. You drank, the being said. The voice was not sound, but vibration in his bones. You have bound yourself to the source. Elias's throat closed. He tried to ask, "What am I now?" But the words dissolved before leaving his mouth. You are no longer singular, the being continued. You are the anchor. The continuum will awaken through you. Human intervention's door to the quarantine chamber hissed open. Yara, flanked by 2 security officers, pulse rifles raised. Step away from him, she barked, eyes wide at the impossible figures inside. But the rifles did nothing. The light-bent beings ignored the weapons as one ignores dust. The chamber hummed louder, and the rifles crumpled in their hands. Metal folding in slow-motion arcs, reduced to harmless spirals. Yara froze, caught between fear and fury. Elias, what the hell is happening? Elias looked at her, and for the first time he realized he had no answer she could use. They came for me. The beings inclined their heads. Not a bow of deference, but acknowledgement, recognition. Then, as silently as they appeared, they blurred, dissolved, and vanished, leaving only the faintest shimmer in the air. The hum in Elias's chest remained. The accusation hours later, Aaron stormed into the medbay, flanked by corporate enforcers. He pointed at Elias through the glass like a man damning a contagion. You've compromised this entire outpost. Unauthorized contact with unknown entities. Your company property, Kale, and you will be transferred to orbit immediately. If you resist, you'll be sedated and crated like the hazard you are. Elias's blood burned. The whisper in his mind flared into many voices at once. Anchor, seed, bridge. Do not let them take you. The medbay lights flickered, systems faltered, and the floor trembled. For a moment, reality itself stuttered. Time skipped like a corrupted recording. Aaron staggered, his boots scraping against a floor that seemed to bend underfoot. Elias had not meant to do it, but he had done it. Yara's eyes found his through the glass. She looked at him not with fear now, but with recognition. The cave, the pool, the voice they had all been leading here. You're not theirs anymore, she whispered. But you're not ours either. Elias sank back onto the cot, veins glowing faint as embers under his skin. Outside, high above the yellow sky, the watchers waited. He wasn't sure if they were guardians, judges, or executioners, but he knew one thing with the certainty of blood and whisper. He was no longer alone. Dawn broke as a smear of pale light across Threxus 9's horizon, but no one in the outpost noticed. All eyes were fixed on the sky where the black ships still hovered, silent and immense. The company declared martial lockdown. Orders came down. Elias Kale was to be transferred to orbit for containment and study. Containment meant vivisection. Study meant obliteration disguised as research. Yara cornered him in quarantine before the security detail arrived. Her face was drawn, her hands restless on the grip of a sidearm she knew would be useless. They're going to cut you apart. Not just body-mind too. You know that, right? Elias nodded. The hum inside him had grown constant now, a low resonance that matched his pulse. He felt as if the planet itself were breathing through him. I don't think they can, he said quietly. Yara's eyes hardened. Then what are you going to do? He looked at his hands, faintly luminous in the dim light. Something I don't understand yet. The fracture of the enforcers came in armored ranks, rifles primed, visors down. Arons led them, smug certainty lacquered onto his face like polish. Sedate him, he ordered, and prepare the transfer pod. Elias felt the fear first, the animal instinct to flee. But fear was quickly buried under something deeper, older, a rising tide of awareness. His vision flickered. Walls lost solidity, breaking into streams of equations, spiraling glyphs that spelled truths he couldn't translate, but somehow knew. When the first enforcer stepped forward, reality bent. The floor rippled like liquid. Rifles unraveled, disassembling into their base molecules. The men staggered, reaching for balance in a world suddenly made of pliant rules. One screamed as his visor displayed constellations that weren't in any chart. Elias hadn't moved. His body was only a channel. The continuum was moving through him. Stop. Yara's voice cut across the chaos. She stood in the doorway, weapon lowered, eyes fixed on Elias. Don't kill them, please. Her plea anchored him. The resonance receded, leaving the room intact though weapons lay in spirals of melted alloy. And the enforcers stared at him with the terror usually reserved for gods. The return to the pool whisper rose again. No longer faint but a chorus, back to the source. The bridge must be completed. Elias knew where he had to go. The cavern called him not in words, but in gravitational certainty. He walked past the trembling enforcers, past Yara's wide eyes, past the protests of Aron's sputtering threats. None tried to stop him. None could. Yara followed. If you're walking into that cave again, you're not doing it alone. They descended into the suture together. The rope anchors were still in place, though the cave seemed changed, its songs clearer now, resonant with Elias's own heartbeat. The honeycomb column thrummed with chords as they passed, harmonizing with the glow in his veins. When they reached the chamber, the pool shone brighter than before. Not water, not light, but something in between. Tessellations rippled across the surface, like stars arranging themselves into new constellations. They're waiting for you, Yara whispered, awed despite herself. The air shimmered. The watchers appeared again, cloaked in bending light. Their voices pressed into the chamber. Anchor. The continuum will awaken through you. The become Angelias knelt at the pool's edge. This time, he didn't hesitate. He placed his hands in the liquid and let it surge up his arms, flooding into him like a tide. His body dissolved not into death, but into expansion. His vision stretched beyond the chamber, beyond Threxus 9, beyond the star system itself. He saw the lattice of light from his dreams, not as an outsider but as part of it. Each node was a memory of civilizations older than humanity. Each line a conduit of thought spanning galaxies. He was not Elias Kale alone. He was the anchor, the bridge between matter and the continuum. Through him, the network pulsed awake after eons of dormancy. Yara fell back as the chamber walls flickered, reality shimmering between stone and infinite sky. She shouted his name, but her voice was a single drop in an ocean of voices now pouring through him. Elias turned not with a face of flesh, but with a presence vast and radiant. For a heartbeat, he was both man and constellation. The whisper, now part of him, spoke with infinite weight. You have no idea what you just became. And Elias smiled, because at last, he understood that not knowing was the beginning. Epilogue. When the resonance subsided, the pool calmed. The chamber was empty save for Yara, trembling on the stone floor. Elias was gone. But above Threxus 9, the black ships shifted formation, their silent vigil broken. They turned, slowly, as if acknowledging something fulfilled, and vanished into the void. The miners said the cave was quiet afterward. No more singing stone, no more trembling air. Yet sometimes, at night, Yara swore she heard a voice threaded through the wind. Patient and vast, anchor, bridge, become.